I thought the worst thing that could happen on my 7th wedding anniversary was forgetting the reservation. I was wrong. The worst thing was standing in my own kitchen with a crate of beer in my hands, hearing my wife laugh about the man she had been sleeping with, while she believed I was outside celebrating our marriage. 7 years. 7 anniversaries. 7 years of trusting the same woman with every part of my life. And on the night we were supposed to celebrate all of it, I discovered that the marriage I thought I was celebrating had already been broken for months. What made it worse was the way she talked about me. She didn't sound guilty. She didn't sound frightened. She sounded certain. Certain that I would never find out. Certain that I trusted her too much to question her. And then she said something that I would replay in my head for weeks afterward. Darnell would never believe it came from me. At that moment, I didn't walk into the room. I didn't confront her. I didn't even let her know I was there. I simply stood still and listened. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with a confession. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the middle of a celebration, when the person who betrayed you doesn't realize you're close enough to hear every word. Before we get into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. My name is Darnell Bennett, and at the time this happened, I was 39 years old and had been married to Zaria for 7 years. From the outside, we looked like one of those couples who had figured marriage out. We had a comfortable home, steady jobs, friends we'd known for years, and a routine that felt familiar enough to be reassuring. Zaria was 36. She was outgoing, confident, and could walk into a room full of strangers and somehow leave knowing everyone's name. I was quieter. I liked sports, good food, working with my hands, and having a peaceful home to come back to. We were different in a lot of ways, but those differences had never bothered me. In fact, I thought they were part of what made us work. She brought excitement into my life, and I gave her stability. We had arguments like every married couple, but nothing that made me think our marriage was in danger. That's why what happened felt so impossible. There had been no dramatic warning, no confession, no huge fight before that night. Just small changes I'd explained away because I loved my wife and trusted her. That Saturday morning was our anniversary, and I'd decided to make the celebration special. We weren't going anywhere expensive. Instead, I planned a backyard dinner with a handful of close friends. I'd bought steaks, burgers, sides, desserts, drinks, and several crates of beer. I'd spent more money than I should have on the food because I wanted everything to feel perfect. By 9 in the morning, I was already outside cleaning the patio and preparing the grill. Zaria opened the back door and stared at me. She asked why I was working so hard when everyone wasn't arriving until late afternoon. I told her I wanted everything ready early. She laughed and said I was acting like I was catering a wedding. Then she came over, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed me. "Happy anniversary, baby." I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Happy anniversary, baby." She looked into my eyes and said, 7 years. I remember smiling because I was proud of that number. 7 years felt like an accomplishment. It felt like proof that whatever we'd built together was strong enough to last. By noon, everything was ready. The patio was clean. The tables were set. The grill was prepared. The drinks were cold. Zaria brought out a tray of appetizers and complimented me on the setup. She seemed happy. She looked exactly like the woman I'd married. But now, when I think back, I remember something else. Her phone stayed in her hand almost the entire time. Whenever a notification appeared, she'd glance at it and sometimes turn the screen away. I had noticed that habit before. I'd simply ignored it. She had become more protective of her phone during the previous few months, but I never considered it evidence of anything. She'd also been working late more often. There were nights when she came home after 9, sometimes after 10. She always had an explanation. Work was busy. A coworker needed help. Kenesha had needed to talk. There was always something. And I believed her. I didn't want to be the husband who turned every late night into an interrogation. I didn't want my marriage to become a courtroom where my wife had to prove her innocence every time she walked through the door. There was one moment, however, that I had almost forgotten. About 3 weeks before our anniversary, I'd been nearby during my lunch break and decided to surprise Zaria at her office. I hadn't told her I was coming. I had picked up lunch for both of us and thought we'd eat together for 20 minutes before I went back to work. When I walked into the office, the receptionist told me Zaria was in the conference room. I thanked her and walked down the hallway. When I reached the partly open door, I saw Zaria standing inside with Omari Whitfield. They weren't kissing, they weren't holding hands. Nothing happened that I could point to and say, "There, that's proof." But they were standing close, very close. Close enough that their conversation seemed private, even though they were in her workplace. Zaria was smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile at work. Omari leaned toward her as he spoke, and she lowered her voice. When they noticed me, both of them stepped apart. Zaria's expression changed immediately. "Darnell, what are you doing here?" I held up the food. "Surprise lunch." She smiled and walked over to me. Omari greeted me casually. He acted completely normal. He explained that he'd stopped by to discuss something related to work. I nodded. There was nothing obviously wrong with the explanation. Omari didn't work in her department, but they knew each other through our social circle and business connections. It wasn't impossible that he had a reason to be there. Zaria thanked me for bringing lunch, and we laughed about it. I left after maybe 15 minutes. On the drive back to work, something bothered me. I couldn't explain exactly what it was. They had looked too comfortable together, too familiar. But then I reminded myself that I'd seen two people talking. That's all. I told myself I was thinking too much. I loved Zaria. I trusted her. And I wasn't going to destroy 7 years of marriage because of a feeling I couldn't even explain. That memory returned to me during the anniversary party. At the time, I didn't connect it to anything. I was too busy making sure everyone had enough food. Around 4 in the afternoon, our friends began arriving. Kenisha was one of the first. She walked through the gate carrying a large gift bag and immediately hugged Zaria. The two women had been close for years. Kenisha knew our relationship, our arguments, our plans, practically everything. I considered her family. Then Omari arrived carrying another crate of beer. I joked that he had come prepared to make sure nobody remembered the evening. He laughed. Zaria walked over and greeted him warmly. She asked whether he'd brought the beer she liked. He said he had. She laughed and thanked him. Again, nothing looked wrong. But now that I think about it, there was a strange familiarity between them. It wasn't obvious enough to make a scene. It was simply there. The party continued. People ate, drank, laughed, and told stories. The music got louder as the evening went on. Zaria moved between groups, greeting guests and making everyone feel welcome. Omari spent most of the early evening talking to the other men. Every now and then, I caught him looking toward Zaria. I didn't think anything of it. He was her friend too. At one point, Zaria laughed at something he said and touched his arm. It lasted maybe a second. Then she moved away. I saw it, but my brain dismissed it immediately. Friends touch each other. People laugh. There are innocent explanations for almost everything. That was the problem. I always chose the innocent explanation because I believed the people involved were innocent. I wasn't searching for betrayal. I was enjoying my anniversary. As the sun went down, everyone moved closer to the patio. Someone turned up the music. The lights came on. We opened another crate of beer. I remember looking around at the people in my backyard and feeling lucky. My wife was there. Our friends were there. The food had turned out well. Nobody had complained. I remember thinking that life was good. I had no idea that less than an hour later, I would be standing inside my own home, trying to understand how badly I'd misunderstood it. Around 9, one of our friends announced that we were almost out of beer. Everyone started joking about how quickly the drinks had disappeared. I told them there was another crate in the garage. I walked inside. The garage was connected to the house by a short hallway near the kitchen. As I approached the garage, I heard voices coming from the side porch. I recognized Kenesha first. Then I heard Zaria. I wasn't trying to listen. I wasn't sneaking around. I was simply walking to get the beer. But then Kenesha said my name. Darnell. I stopped. Kenesha's voice was low. You seriously think Darnell isn't going to notice? For a second, I thought they were talking about something harmless. Maybe a surprise, maybe the anniversary gift, maybe something they'd bought without telling me. Then Zaria answered. He isn't going to notice. Her voice was calm. Kenesha said, You don't know that. Zaria laughed. Please. Darnell trusts me. I stood there completely still. Then Kenesha asked the question that changed everything. And what about Omari? My heart dropped. There are moments when your mind refuses to accept what your ears are hearing. This was one of them. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. Maybe Omari had nothing to do with it. Maybe they were discussing something else. But then Zaria answered, Omari knows what this is. Kenesha became quiet. Then she said, You're cheating on your husband. Zaria didn't deny it. She simply said, I know. I felt my hand tighten around the doorframe. 7 years. 7 years of marriage. And suddenly I was standing in my own hallway, listening to my wife acknowledge an affair with a man I'd invited into our home. Kenesha asked how long it had been going on. Zaria hesitated. Several months. Several months. That meant the late nights, the strange phone behavior, the unexplained dinners, the office encounter I'd convinced myself meant nothing. Suddenly, all those moments came rushing back. Kenesha asked, Are you really not going to tell Darnell? Zaria laughed. Tell him what? Kenesha said, The truth. Zaria answered, He won't believe it came from me. Then she laughed again. That laugh hurt more than the confession, because she wasn't afraid. She wasn't ashamed. She was confident. She was confident because she knew exactly how much I trusted her. If you were Darnell, and you overheard your wife admitting she was cheating on you, would you confront her immediately, or stay quiet and find out the whole truth first? I backed away before they could hear me. I walked into the garage and found the crate of beer. My hands were shaking. I sat down for a moment and stared at the floor. The party was still happening outside. People were laughing. Someone was calling for more drinks. My anniversary was still happening 10 feet away, even though my marriage had just changed forever. I had two choices. I could walk out there and confront her immediately, or I could pretend I hadn't heard anything and figure out what was really happening. I chose the second. I carried the crate outside. One of our friends shouted that I'd saved the night. I laughed and said something about being the hero nobody deserved. Everyone laughed. Zaria looked at me. She smiled. Then she walked over and kissed my cheek. I almost pulled away. Instead, I smiled. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah. She looked at me for another second. Then she walked away. I watched her, and for the first time in 7 years, I wondered whether the woman standing in front of me was someone I actually knew. I didn't confront her that night. I waited until the party ended. I watched everyone leave. I watched Omari shake my hand and thank me for the anniversary celebration. He told me we'd have to do something like it again. I looked him directly in the eyes. Absolutely. He smiled. I smiled back. But inside, I was trying to understand how long he'd been standing in my backyard, pretending to be my friend, while sleeping with my wife. After midnight, the house finally became quiet. Zaria sat beside me on the couch and said she'd had a wonderful anniversary. I told her I had too. She kissed me. Then she went upstairs. I stayed downstairs. I thought about the office. I thought about Omari. I thought about Kanisha. And then I decided I needed to know whether Kanisha had been covering for Zaria. The next afternoon, I called her. I didn't tell her I'd heard anything. I didn't mention the side porch. I didn't mention Omari. I simply asked her a question. Kanisha, can I ask you something? She said yes. I paused. Is there something you think Zaria is hiding from me? Silence. Not a long silence. Maybe 3 seconds. But 3 seconds can tell you everything. Finally, Kanisha said, "Why would you ask me that?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking things." She told me I shouldn't make assumptions. I asked her again, "Do you think she's hiding something from me?" She said no. But her voice didn't sound convincing. I didn't push. I simply thanked her and ended the call. That conversation gave me something I hadn't had before. Not proof. Confirmation that my suspicion wasn't completely imaginary. Over the next few days, I watched Zaria differently. She didn't know why. She started asking whether I was okay. I told her I was tired. She asked whether something had happened at work. I said no. Then one evening, I casually mentioned Omari. "Have you talked to Omari lately?" Her reaction was immediate. "Why?" I shrugged. "No reason." She stared at me. I walked toward the refrigerator. She followed me. "Why are you asking about him?" I turned around. "I told you. No reason." She stood there for a moment. Then she walked away. That was the first time I knew she was worried. Not because she'd confessed, because she'd reacted. And I had learned something about people who are hiding things. Sometimes the question isn't what they say, it's what they react to. A few days later, Omari called me. He asked if I wanted to get a drink. I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about everything except the thing I knew we were both thinking about. Then Omari finally asked, "Everything good with you and Zaria?" I looked at him. "Why wouldn't it be?" He shrugged. "You seemed different at the anniversary." I smiled. Maybe I was tired. He nodded. Then he asked whether Zaria and I had been arguing. I said no. He looked relieved. That was the moment I knew. Not because he'd admitted anything, because his relief wasn't the reaction of a friend checking on another friend's marriage. It was the reaction of a man who had something to lose. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I asked him one question. "Omari, if there was ever something you needed to tell me, you'd tell me, right?" He looked directly at me. "Of course." I nodded. "Good." Then we changed the subject. When I left the restaurant, I knew exactly where my suspicion stood. But I still didn't have the whole truth. So I decided to stop asking questions. Instead, I gave Zaria a reason to reveal it herself. The following Friday morning, I told her I had to travel for work. She looked surprised. "For how long?" "Just overnight." She asked when I was leaving. I told her that evening. She nodded. Then, about 10 minutes later, she asked a question that seemed innocent. "So you're definitely staying overnight?" "Yeah." She smiled. "Okay." I kissed her goodbye later that afternoon and left. But I didn't go on the trip. I drove around for several hours, parked somewhere quiet, and waited. I wasn't trying to catch my wife in bed. I wasn't trying to create a dramatic scene. I simply wanted to see whether the story she'd told me about her evening matched reality. Around 10:30, I drove back toward the neighborhood. Halfway down the street, I saw a familiar vehicle. Omari's. Parked away from our driveway. I slowed down. My hands went cold. I didn't get out. I didn't approach the house. I simply sat there, looking at the vehicle. The man I'd trusted. The man I'd welcomed into my home. The man I'd celebrated my anniversary with. His car was sitting outside my house, while my wife believed I was hundreds of miles away. I took a photograph, then I drove away. The next morning, Zaria texted me. How's the trip? I stared at the message for several seconds. Then I replied, Good. How was your night? She responded quickly. Quiet. Watched a movie and went to bed early. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I suddenly realized there was nothing left to explain. She had looked me in the eyes. She had lied. And she had done it effortlessly. I replied, Glad you got some rest. Then I put my phone away. I spent the rest of that day making decisions. Not emotional ones, practical ones. I contacted an attorney. I reviewed our finances. I gathered important documents. I made sure I understood what would happen if I decided to end the marriage. And while looking through our shared expenses, I found things I'd previously ignored. Restaurant charges, hotel charges, purchases I'd never seen before. Some of them matched nights when Zaria had told me she was working late. Others matched weekends she'd said she was with Kenesha. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about an affair. It was about months of lies. That evening, I went home. Zaria was waiting for me. She looked nervous. You're back early. I nodded. Yeah. She studied my face. How was the trip? I looked at her. Fine. She smiled. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. I saw the name. Omari. She immediately silenced the call. Neither of us said anything. I walked past her. She followed me. Darnell. I stopped. She looked frightened. We need to talk. I turned around. You're right. She swallowed. What do you want to know? That question told me everything. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, How long? She started crying. I didn't move. How long, Zaria? She finally said, A few months. I nodded. Omari? She closed her eyes. Then nodded. I felt no shock. I'd already known. What hurt was hearing her confirm it. She tried to explain. She said it started as conversations, then emotional closeness, then one mistake, then another. I stopped her. How many times? She didn't answer. I asked again, how many times? She whispered, I don't know. I looked away. For 7 years, I had imagined that if Zaria ever betrayed me, I'd know exactly what I'd do. I'd yell. I'd demand answers. I'd throw things. I'd make her regret it. But standing there, I felt none of that. I felt tired. Then she said something that changed the entire conversation. I didn't think you'd leave. I looked back at her. What? I didn't think you'd leave me. She was crying. I knew you'd be hurt. I knew you'd be angry. But I thought we'd eventually work through it. That was when I understood. She hadn't been protecting our marriage. She had been protecting herself from consequences. She thought my love was permanent. She thought my loyalty was guaranteed. She thought 7 years meant I had too much invested to walk away. I told her she was wrong. She begged me to reconsider. She promised counseling. She promised Omari would never be part of our lives again. She said she loved me. I believed that she had feelings for me. But love without respect wasn't enough anymore. If you had spent 7 years building a marriage, would you walk away after an affair? Or would you try counseling and give your spouse one final chance? I told her something I'd been thinking about since the anniversary. If I'd heard you telling Kenesha that you were ashamed, that you regretted what you'd done, that you were afraid of losing me, maybe we could have had a different conversation. She cried harder. But that's not what I heard. She looked down. I heard you laughing, she whispered. I didn't mean it that way. You laughed about my trust. I was scared. You weren't scared. I paused. You were confident. She had no answer. I continued. You were confident because you believed I would never leave. The room became silent. Then I told her I had already spoken with an attorney. Her face changed. You already decided? I nodded. Yes. She asked whether 7 years meant nothing. I looked at her. 7 years meant everything to me. Then I paused. But I can't spend another 7 years pretending this didn't happen. The divorce process wasn't easy. Nothing about it was. There were lawyers, paperwork, financial discussions, arguments, tears, and moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Zaria continued asking for another chance. Sometimes, I almost gave her one. Then I'd remember the anniversary. I'd remember standing in that hallway. I'd remember the way she'd laughed. And I'd remember that she hadn't been afraid of losing me until she realized she actually could. Omari disappeared from our social circle soon after. I heard that things between him and Zaria didn't last. Once the secrecy disappeared, the excitement apparently disappeared with it. He had been willing to participate in an affair. He wasn't willing to build a life around the consequences of one. Kenesha eventually apologized. She told me she'd known for longer than I realized. I asked why she never told me. She said she was trying to protect her friend. I told her she had protected the wrong person. Then I stopped talking to her. Not because I hated her, because I needed distance from everyone connected to the version of my life that had ended. Months later, I returned to the backyard. The patio lights were still there. The chairs were still there. The grill was still there. The place looked exactly the same. But I wasn't the same man. I thought about that anniversary. About the food, the laughter, the beer, the people I trusted. And especially the crate of beer I'd carried into the backyard after discovering my marriage was falling apart. For a long time I was angry. Then I wasn't. Eventually I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to embarrass Zaria. I didn't need to destroy Omari. I didn't need to tell everyone what happened. I didn't need to make them suffer the way I had suffered. I just needed to walk away. And that was enough. Because Zaria had been wrong about one thing. She thought my trust meant I was weak. She thought my patience meant I'd tolerate anything. She thought 7 years meant I would stay no matter what. But trust isn't weakness. Loyalty isn't stupidity. And loving someone doesn't mean abandoning your own dignity to keep them. Darnell said he didn't need revenge. He only needed to stop being her husband. Do you think he made the right decision? Sometimes the hardest decision isn't staying. It's accepting that the person you built your life around has become someone you can no longer trust. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rebuilding a life so peaceful that you no longer need the person who once broke it. That anniversary was supposed to remind me of 7 years of love. Instead, it became the night I discovered the truth. And strangely enough, I'm grateful I heard it. Because if I hadn't walked into that hallway for a crate of beer, I might have spent another year believing the lies. Maybe 5 years. Maybe 10. I might have kept bringing Zaria dinner when she worked late. I might have kept defending her when someone questioned her behavior. I might have kept calling Omari my friend. I might have continued celebrating a marriage that only one person was truly protecting. But I heard her. And once I heard the truth, I couldn't unhear it. So when I think about that night now, I don't remember the betrayal first. I remember the moment I finally understood something about myself. I could love someone deeply and still choose to leave them. I could forgive someone without taking them back. And I could lose 7 years without losing the rest of my life. If this story hit home for you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and subscribe to Unfinished Tales so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive when you're searching for it. Sometimes it appears in the middle of an ordinary night during a celebration, while everyone around you is laughing and drinking and telling you how lucky you are. And sometimes the person who thinks they know exactly what you'll do when you discover the truth has never understood you at all.